Oh, welcome to a very special episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and returning to the show. It has been far too long. My friend, my favorite journeyman quarterback in the world, Sage Rosenfels, and for those listening on the audio version, wearing a Reebok Miami Dolphins hat from the old days. What is going on, Sage? How are you?
I'm doing great. Good morning. I've been out of the podcast game a little bit, just doing an Iowa podcast, sort of for Iowa and Iowa State fans, called Iowa Everywhere. I do an interview about once every 2 weeks, and I just have I find people in my past, former players or coaches or media people, or present like Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, and he'll come on. People come on, and sometimes we talk about football, but really it feels like more of a how you been? And I'd like to know more about you, Kevin Carter. Who was a teammate of mine in Miami and now works for CBS Sports and covers a lot of college football. But he's he's the other guy who played for Steve Spurrier and Nick Saban. I think there's two people in the whole world, and it was Kevin Carter and myself. So that's what I've been up to amongst other things, but not in the media game and not. Uh, Totally entrenched in Vikings football, totally entrenched in the NFL or college football. Still, of course, following as a fan. But it's nice to be back on talking ball.
Yeah, and our connection remains though, because my wife and I go to this restaurant where you order and then they give you a number. And the numbers are all from 1 to 19. So it's always a quarterback number. So every time we get the number, then I'll say, "Oh, well that's Bubby Brister or that's Bernie Kosar, whatever." So what I'll do is I'll go to the Pro Football Reference page, screenshot their stats without the name, send it to you to see if you can identify the journeyman quarterback without seeing their name. And you have never missed. You nailing Bubby Brister was pretty darn impressive. But that remains our connection of talking ball from time to time. But I want to talk to you this week specifically because of your connection with Brock Purdy. You didn't just go to the same school as Brock Purdy, but also worked with him in the pre-draft process. Did you ever see this coming that Brock Purdy would become the starter of the 49ers and then emerge to leading one of the best offenses in the NFL?
Hmm, that's a good question. Um, that is a really good question. I don't want to ramble on about Brock Purdy, but when I played football at Iowa State, I threw 10 touchdown passes my senior year. I think I threw 20 or something in 2 years as a starter. I threw for 52%. Right. We won with a solid defense and a ground game. We led the Big 12 in rushing. We run some bootlegs. I would run the ball a lot, sort of like Daniel Jones in New York, like not the most he's not Lamar Jackson out there, but he can get it done when it needs to get done. That's sort of how our offense was. And we took care of the football. Meanwhile, Brock Purdy, I come back from playing and I'm watching this kid and it's like, man, he is out there just making magic all the time. I mean, his accuracy was always really good. Occasionally he'd throw an interception and make a bad decision. But for the most part, I mean, there'd be a lot of times where he'd catch a snap and a blitz would come and he would just sort of like fade to one way and then like off balance throw just like an extremely accurate pass on a really hard throw 20 yards down to the field to the tight end. And it's like, wow, that's a great play. Like, that's a great play. And I would see 8 great plays every game, like a lot of them. It just sort of is a style of their offense. It's not overly sort of robotic for the quarterback. They don't do a lot of like long extended play actions or bootlegs. It's a lot of RPOs and a lot of drop back pass. And you get a lot of weird fronts and weird defenses in the Big 12 too. So it's not like you can have a protection for every blitz that you're going to see in the Big 12. And so anyway, I'm watching him throw his freshman year. He goes in mid-season. And I right away, I'm like, this little short little guy with the thick thighs can, he doesn't have a big arm and the ball doesn't like spin like crazy, but he's a little playmaker out there. Then he'd run and he'd fake a pitch and make someone miss and you rumble forward for 15 or 20 yards. And he was just a little competitor. And it just sort of was like that for the next 4 years at Iowa State. And They relied on him a lot. If Brock Purdy got hurt, Iowa State would not have been very good. I'm a big believer in this concept of if you can find a college football team and say, you know what, I'm going to take that guy off that team and put someone else in there, how good are they going to be? Drew Brees at Purdue is always like the easiest one. If you took Drew Brees off Purdue back in the day, maybe they're a 500 football team, but they go to the Rose Bowl and they win it. So Brock Purdy was sort of like that, but the throws and the accuracy and the anticipation. Because I was doing an Iowa State radio show at that time. I did the Iowa State side. Chuck Long did the Iowa side. So I'd go back and I'd watch the film, like the real film, not just the TV version. And it was like, man, this kid is making throws. Like, I'm super impressed. Did they ever throw the ball 60 yards down the field? No, but his accuracy and the way he could throw off balance and then his athleticism to create was, I thought, really impressive. And so when he was coming out, the whole thing was like, well, he's, 5'11" or 6 foot. I don't know how tall he is. And he doesn't have a big arm. And he's just not impressive when you see like Josh Allen. When you see Peyton Manning or some of these guys, you're like, look at that giant person. And then it's like, well, actually, I'm about the same size. I don't realize how big I am. But Brock was just not one of those guys who's ends up being on the list because of these sort of tangible measurements is probably how they say it. But all the intangible stuff, and again, that accuracy and sort of ability to throw on the move and throw on the run and anticipate was, I thought, off the chart. So I'm at his pro day. I mean, here's how it's interesting. I'm at his pro day at Iowa State, and Kellen Moore, who's at the time the Cowboys offensive coordinator and is now the Chargers offensive coordinator, we sat there for 3 hours. I think those quarterbacks coaches I seem to sort of find, or they find me, and we just kept talking about all sorts of things. And he was super interested in like my history with that sort of Shanahan offense. But was he over analyzing Brock Purdy? Like, no, like he was watching, but it wasn't like he was all that super interested. And we were talking about all sorts of things. And sometimes we're talking to each other. We're not even watching Brock throw. I feel like I sort of missed part of his workout. But I mean, that's just sort of how interested people were in him because he didn't have that big upside. So short story long, yes, I had a really good hunch that he'd be out there. My concern was his ability to get rid of the football with the NFL timing situation, because he held on the ball a lot. And the NFL, that thing is a hot potato, and you got to throw on rhythm, and you got to get back and stick your foot in the ground. And it's not like you're just bouncing around back there, like looking over the field. And I feel like he was doing a little bit too much of that at Iowa State. But they had long plays that were took a while to develop, and so he had to hold on to the football. In the NFL, they minimize those super long developing pocket passing plays, get so hard. But he's getting the football out so quick. I think he's got he has the best coaching in the National Football League. I don't know. You could probably say Tua is up there. I don't know who the quarterback's coach is in Miami, but Brian Greasy, are you kidding me? Is his quarterback's coach. The best situation. Jimmy Garoppolo, who had been in the offense for a number of years, so he got to sort of watch someone really run it. That wasn't like some elite player too. And, it couldn't have been a better situation for him. Great defense, but Brian Greasy is his quarterback's coach. You got to realize Brian Greasy was playing quarterback in Tampa when Kyle Shanahan was quality control for John Gruden. So their minds and the way they think, and of course Brian Greasy played for Mike Shanahan, right? And went to the Pro Bowl. One year he had 15 touchdowns and 1 interception going into like week 9 or something like that. To have him as your quarterback's coach, maybe Eli was really smart. Greasy may have been the smartest quarterback I played with. He was like a political science major at Michigan. Grew up, private schools and all the things in Coral Gables. To have him with all that knowledge, even though he was sort of out of football for a while, but and then of course Kyle Shanahan's extremely cutting edge offense that's always changing. To have that to be his where he starts is sort of a dream that I think he knows how lucky he is. I do. I'm sure he does realize that, like, you watch other offenses, you're like, man, they don't do the things that we do. And I think that Brock seeing that. So, yeah, I didn't think Brock this was going to be happening, but I really felt like, man, if this guy gets in there, I think that the right offense, the right coaching can turn him into an NFL starting quarterback, because that accuracy and that the instinctual talent he has was so unlike I had really seen in college football in a long time.
Folks, we are going all in on prize picks this football season. Every week, we are playing and testing out our skills here on Purple Insider to see if we can predict what numbers players will put up every Sunday. If you haven't heard of it, trust me, you're going to want to check it out. Prize picks is the easiest and best way to play daily fantasy. Instead of battling against thousands of other players and people who spend their entire lives doing fantasy, all you do is pick more or less on between 2 and 6 player stat projections. So, say a quarterback's number is 250.5 yards, go more or less, and bang, you are playing. And you can pick from hundreds of players and numbers this football season. The cool thing is that it's quick and easy and does not cost an arm and a leg. You can turn $10 into 250 just like that. Again, the perfect way to fit it into a busy day. Click, click, and you're playing. This isn't just something that I like. You're going to hear us doing every single week prize picks on the show on Purple Insider. So go to prizepicks.com/purple and use the code PURPLE for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/purple with the code PURPLE. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Folks, want to remind you to make Little Caesars the official pizza sponsor of the NFL part of your game day. Order online during their Pizza pregame 1 hour before NFL games and get ready for some football and fun. Choose your favorite Little Caesars pizza or pick the toppings you crave. Either way, you win. And speaking of winning, everyone scores with convenient delivery or their in-store pizza portal pickup. So grab some friends and enjoy a few slices during the tastiest hour before kickoff. Yeah, I mean, so the debate is going on all the time with a player like this when they're drafted in the seventh round of like, is it real? Is it just the system? Is it just the circumstance and so forth? And look, throughout history, we have seen pop up quarterbacks. So there's a reason why you would want to be skeptical when it's not somebody who's Josh Allen's size. We saw Case Keenum, take the Vikings to the NFC Championship. We saw Nick Foles get hot for a playoffs and win the Super Bowl, and then never did anything like that before, never did anything like that after. And I think it's fair for people to wonder, all right, is the physical skill really there? But I also think that if you're watching closely, and I know he's coming off of a tough game where he led a game-winning drive, but a kicker let him down. But against maybe the best defense in the NFL, a hard game against Cleveland. But I also think that CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins and like other guys have tried this to not as much success as Brock Purdy. And I think there's way more playmaker in him than there is in a lot of those type of pop-up quarterbacks. And I also think that handling and managing all the stuff that he's asking you to do before the snap and after the snap, the reads and things like that, I don't think it's just as simple as anybody can drop back and throw to open receivers. It's identifying where they are, it's lining them up correctly, it's getting the protections. And I saw a stat today that will be interesting for this matchup that he's crushing it against the blitz, which to me says his preparation is extremely good. And I think there was some sense for that when he was coming out, that he had the mental capacity to handle something like this.
He has his probably extreme talent. Well, he's got a lot of things going for him. One, he's extremely just grounded and focused. I think you can see that. And if you follow him like on social media, and he's not some big poster by any means, but he just seems like the most down to earth, focused young quarterback, and that's not easy. There's a lot of things going on for young guys, but his ability to take an information, that all the information that's going on with their offense, which there's a lot going on in these things with the different types of motions and the different types of plays. And, Shanahan's getting an almost audibling system and, check with me's and all these things. But for him to take all that so quickly and digest it and then go out there and from day one play like he's a 4-year veteran or 3-year veteran where he's very comfortable in this offense. And the fact is, you go back to last year, he's out there with guys that he's never taken reps with. When you go out there as a third string guy, you never are throwing to Deebo Samuel. You are never getting snaps from this center. You're never working with these guys ever. And for him to come in and so fluidly and just like veteran quarterback, obviously, I don't know what his like IQ is or his mental capacity or all those things, but at least from a sports perspective, he can take in a ton of information, and both with what you're doing and what he's seen out in the field, and it computes really, really, really fast for him. And that's probably his, another one of his big talents that, it's hard to measure that at the combine in shorts and t-shirts.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this as I was watching Justin Fields, and I watched the tape back on Justin Fields from this last game, and I was blown away how little he can see out there. That it was basically he would get to his first read, but he would come off of his first read quickly if there was anything going on in front of him. I mean, you've been a part of that chaos before, but we almost just take it for granted when quarterbacks look comfortable how difficult that is. And I feel like that's the hardest part as you're talking about, because in college, you can see everything pretty well. Everything's super spread out. One side of the field is 75 yards long. You can see where everything's going on. And it
And teams
doesn't
and
seem to
teams
be.
play and teams really do play, I don't know, not that many coverages. The Iowa Hawkeyes are 6-1 in the Big Ten West. Okay. The Iowa Hawkeyes have been playing the same defense. There's a guy in Omaha that I know that is 37 years old or something. And he's like, they're playing the same quarters coverage of when he played DB there at Iowa State. A lot, they play quarters 90% of the snaps. And you don't see as wide a variety, I don't think. There is this sort of 3-man rush thing with a lot more going on now, but some defenses are extremely simple in college football. And to move on to the NFL for Brock is impressive. But you could tell it struggled with, as you said, with Justin Fields. It's been a real struggle for him to process the information. You understand like processing of information, by the way? Like how that, I know you do, but like how that people, smarts and processing information are extremely different things. And I think where Justin Fields struggles is this sort of processing of all the information that's going on at the same time. And Brock, that his strength. And I think that is testable. And I think that the test will actually say that Justin struggles with the sort of processing of the information of his team and or the other team, and then physically that processing of taking that information in and making it happen. He's lower on that bar, and Brock Purdy is extremely high. So it was like Ryan Fitzpatrick actually was, of course, he's really smart, but his is really high on processing information as well. So that's an interesting attribute that's, again, hard to measure at the combine.
So my favorite, or I don't know, I had a lot of favorites quarterbacks growing up, but like top five for sure, Steve Young. And there's hard not to make a comparison with former quarterbacks and stuff like that. I'm not saying Brock Purdy is Steve Young. Steve Young was an incredible athlete. I think Purdy is a good athlete, but not like running for a 75-yard touchdown or something. But yeah, one of the things that Steve Young said in his A Football Life documentary, which is extremely good, and people should check it out if you care at all about 90s football. He was talking about how, I think it was Mike Holmgren said to him, "You're not going to be able to see your receiver run open. You're going to have to throw it to the spot we tell you to throw it, and just believe that your receiver is going to be there based on what you saw on the defense." And I feel like there's a visualization element to playing quarterback where with Justin Fields, unless the guy had already gone into his break and was wide open, then he would throw the ball. That's just not how quarterback works. Like everything has to be so far ahead. You have to visualize where it's going to be and throw the football there. And also sometimes not even see where the receiver is because the offensive and defensive linemen are 6'6". I mean, this is like I feel like these quarterbacks who are good at it fit into such a small window of being able to do that. And it's not just their preparation, but also how they memorize it and how they, like you said, process it in their brain to be able to do it beforehand. And that's something that you just can't scout in the draft.
I would say, like, when you go into a game, I'm trying to think of how many pass plays you have 150 pass plays or 100 pass plays. With all of them have at least two formations just in case you want to run it twice or something. But you, excuse me, you sort of go into each one of those pass plays and what formation it's in, and you imagine all the possibilities of what coverages and plays, like what defenses you might see. As you the old school flanker drive play, but you're going to go back, and before you go into that game, you're going to say, okay, if I get cover three, what am I thinking? If I get cover two, what am I thinking? If I get cover man to man, what am I thinking? If it's a Sam Mike blitz, where am I going with the football? If it's a Sam Will blitz, what am I thinking? And you start having to go through mentally and sometimes physically too. Like after practice, I'll go back and sort of go through one, two, and what coverage, and just sort of mind work after practice, doing drops and footwork. But you have to like constantly try to be ahead of the game of where you're going to go to the football with what coverage that you think you got when the ball was snapped. You cannot read it out per se. You have to be like, on this coverage, really, the running back who's number 3 in my sort of pattern, he ends up being the one that's probably going to be open. So I will very quickly go through 1, 2, and boom, 3, and it's almost like he's number 1. But you've done is you've done all this stuff beforehand, and that years of that sort of preparation sort of pays off because you can't see anything out there. You got Bryant McKinney to my left, who's 6'7". You got Phil, or maybe I don't know, and Phil Lodeholt, who's 6'7". They're 700 pounds combined at least, and I'm supposed to see Wes Welker out there like that. That's you can't see your people, and you can't see throwback in Terrell Buckley either. He's 5'8" too, so you can't you just see areas, but you see helmets barely move, or the way that's what you really see. And the guys who were smaller, like Brock or Doug Flutie, to me, man, Doug Flutie was like, that guy was back there. And when he threw, he actually got shorter because he had a pretty wide sort of throwing motion, like a baseball player. And so he's like 5'8" when he's letting go of the football, throwing between the guard and the tackle in some window, and then finding some other window. And he was like as good at it as anybody for being a small quarterback, and sort of seeing where the defense was and seeing those little things. And there are a lot of quarterbacks who just really struggle to see that puzzle and how your play fits in the puzzle, and then to quickly process the information to get to number 3 or 4 as quickly as possible. You just can't hold on the football in the NFL. You just can't. It's nearly impossible. And there's certain guys like Justin who have a hard time getting it out really, really quick and anticipating. And that's, again, going back to Brock Purdy, that's what I loved about Purdy, is his anticipation. He'd be throwing a ball and his receiver's completely covered as he's running through a window, and it boom right between the 2 linebackers. He's hitting that tight end Iowa State had, Charlie Coller, on the run right in the chest. And I was like, that's great anticipation. That's hard to sort of trust to do that. And some quarterbacks sort of have that, and other quarterbacks really seem to struggle with it.
Yeah, and that's part of you can make wide receivers open based on where the ball goes. And sometimes we talk about systems and things like that, and we go, well, nobody was open, because you kind of look back at the tape, and when the quarterback is throwing the ball, everyone looks like they're covered. But with anticipation, that's where you can throw people open. That kind of, saying comes from. And I don't think it's something that's very easily scouted from college to the NFL. But as long as we have known each other, which I think is since 2018, you have talked to me about Shanahan Kubiak inspired systems. And what is amazing to me is that the NFL figures out everything. They stop everybody from doing anything. The Wildcat is the all-time example, but there's hundreds of different wrinkles that have been thrown in over the years, and defenses always figure something out. And I think defenses are figuring out a lot of things that teams are doing this year and having a lot of success. Overall, scoring is down, and some of the stuff, the trickery is not working. And here's Kyle Shanahan, just one step ahead of the game as well. And I will say that I think part of his genius is Trent Williams. I think it's Brandon Ayuk. I think it's Deebo Samuel. I think this guy is pretty
Yeah, but
smart
two,
and figured out.
hold on. But one, they drafted those guys.
Yeah,
Right now, like, are they all first round picks? No, they drafted those guys. They developed those guys. Kyle Shanahan's the best wide receiver coach I had in the NFL too. Hands. My first year in Houston, 2006, he was our receivers coach. Hired him from Tampa. He's a young guy. He played receiver at Texas. And when you play receiver in the Big 12 or at Texas, and you're going against, Quentin Jammer and a lot of these guys that are going to go to the NFL, and you're a little skinny receiver, you're going to really, really try to figure out, like, what is the best way for me to, you're not just going to physically impose your Andre Johnson, throw the guy down and run a slant. Like, you have to really, and Kyle was so good at getting people open and developing those receivers. Andre Johnson was a sort of a chest catcher before, after a couple of years in the NFL. And then all of a sudden Kyle's working with him and he became really strong with his hands with the football. His development as a development skills as a receivers coach, tight ends coach, the tight ends block like their tackles because, well, they have incredible teaching with how they do those fundamentals. And it's not just like, well, he ended up with George Kittle or he ended up with Brandon Ayuk. I think there's real development there, and I think it happens right away. And so, I think it's not just his system. It's they do find, like, they know in that system you have to have just a top tier defensive end, and whatever it's willing to take. They got Nick Bosa, right? And so that's what they know what's really, really important in the details and which players are important, and they do a great job of developing them as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and I'm complimenting the approach. I mean, Kyle Shanahan knew what he needed, and he went and got it. He said, "I need one more receiver. Let's get Brandon Ayuk. I need Christian McCaffrey," which at the time they made the deal, I was like, "Are you sure you're going to trade all that?" And I should have trusted him because McCaffrey is a special player with his ability to catch the ball, and that's just like handing a magic wand to Kyle Shanahan. But what is it about him specifically that has allowed him to stay ahead of the game? It's not just the bootlegs as much as we like to talk about,
No, not
running
anymore.
play action.
No, not anymore. I mean, they still do some good quick play action. It's less long drawn out because Brock doesn't throw the ball 60 yards. And to some of those deep play action that they used to have, you really had to chuck it down the field, and they don't do that as much. But yeah. By the way, the McCaffrey thing, as you were talking, I was thinking about. I think what they saw in the McCaffrey deal is, one, they just knew what type of Swiss Army knife player he is. He's a receiver, running back, a little of everything. But the team that he was on, Carolina, I can't remember who the offensive coordinator was, but it wasn't some brilliant mind. And when you see a player who's a great player in an offense, in a coached offense that's not very good, and they're doing pretty well, but they're not like, oh man, he's maybe not the player that he was when he first came out. And you go, like, if we put him in our system, because they know how to maximize the talent and they know great running schemes and they know how to put him out as a wide receiver because he can do all those things too. Know how to, I think they just see value in, like, poorly coached players on other teams. And if we could just get that, like, yeah, his stats he only ran for 800 yards last year. Stats were down, but we see that they have, like, the worst O-line coach in the NFL. Why? Because they all know each other and they know what coaches are better than others. You have a great feel for it. And oddly enough, not all NFL coaching is the same. And so I think they see undervalued players other places. And McCaffrey was definitely one of those players.
But
So
on Shanahan, what is it that makes him so special and able to stay ahead of the game? I know I took you in a bunch of different directions there.
yeah. What's interesting to me when I watched the film with both him and McDaniel, And then really each one of these guys that played for him or coached for him, they go and they sort of spread out like a tree, and they all have their own versions of it, right? The Packers are very different than what San Francisco does now. But I think what he does is he has these principles that starts with, I think, the tight splits. The tight splits by receivers allows them to do so many things and cause so much confusion. It's almost like the high school wing tee in a way. There's so many various things going on, and reverses and motions, but the tight splits, when I watch the film, a lot of the passing combinations and the thoughts about it are still very much there's I watch plays that are like, that's the same play we ran Houston in 2007. It's the same play, but they've just done it with now a new motion. And a lot of times those are running plays. The 3-man bunch toss crack play was called truck back then. Well, now they do it with a motion where the guy's screaming across and you snap it and he's on the left side of the formation, but by the time Brock gets it, tosses it to the running back, that receiver now is the lead blocker who is the fullback in the bunch formation. So they're still doing a lot of these same plays with just sort of like cooler motions, I think, to maximize both the speed of like the receivers. Everything is like so fast. The defense is a hard time computing all that information that's happening, right? And where they're supposed to be and what gap they're supposed to have. They don't like allow you time to think. But yeah, I think he does a great job with that. Those basic principles, though, are still the same. And he understands defense so well. I think that's where it all starts with. Monty Kiffin, great defensive coordinator in NFL history, probably like a Hall of Fame style defensive coordinator. His teaching of the principles of defense, gap soundness, and the way they drop and what they're being taught with their eyes and their feet. And that's where Kyle learned football from when he got to Tampa. He sat in a lot of these Monty Kiffin meetings, and I think that sets him apart. Every other offensive coordinator had been around. You come up, you say, I got into coaching. I'm not going to go to the defensive side of the football. I'm going to go to the offensive. I'm going to hope to be a quarterback's coach at some point, right? So I'm going to start quality control, go quarterback's coach, work my way to coordinator. But never am I like, I'm going to go spend a year or 2 years, spend a lot of time with our defensive coordinator and learn exactly how they describe things. And that almost never happens. And so I think that's Kyle's big strength, is his ability to truly understand exactly how like every single defense works and where the weakness is, because every defense has a weakness or two. And it can be really, really hard to try to manipulate it to figure out what exactly that is and how to use it. And Kyle does that better than anybody. He's still getting great players like George Kittle wide open, catching balls on, some random fake jets or reverse, and just he gets star players wide open. He still does do that on occasion. And like NFL teams don't do that. So I think he just understands the weakness of every single defense. And when he sees it on film, he's like, we're going to run this play. Because that Sam linebacker, when they run the reverse, he's going to lose Kittle because he's got to carry him on the flatten up. And he's going to lose him in the sort of the this, that, and the other, and Kittle's going to be wide open. And sure enough, like that's exactly, they see any undiscipline out there, they just take advantage of it. Kyle once said, if you can break the, what was his phrase? If you can basically break the technique of the defense, you'll make a huge play. It really is that. If you run a stick route versus inside leverage, a little 5-yard out versus inside leverage, that they want you to run that little 5-yard out, then they tackle you for a 6-yard gain and we move on, right? But if you can fake going out and get the linebacker to run outside of you, then get inside of him, that he's being taught to always stay inside technique. Now I get actually inside of him, that's then a huge play is going to occur, because everything they're doing is trying to funnel to a safety, funnel to a corner, funnel to a helping player. And Kyle does a great job of drawing up plays that helps his guys break the technique of the defense.
And it's interesting because that's something that our friends at PFF were looking at a while back about how do teams how often do teams cause a mistake by the opposing defense, which is a really interesting way to look at it. And I don't remember exactly like what the metric said about who was good at it or not, but I'm sure San Francisco was crushing because and if you think about it, like if someone on the defense makes a mistake or has a negative graded play, that your chances of creating a big play are huge. So identifying what could cause that and identifying who could cause that, which is the weaknesses as well, and knowing the principles of the opposing defense and anticipating how they're going to game plan for what you do and putting it all together and having guys execute it. It's the reason why not too many people are great at coaching, because there's a lot going on there from a week to week basis. I do want to ask you a future Vikings question, but first, something I've brought up on the show to numerous people is Brock Purdy comparisons, and I've heard them across the board for a lot of different ones. From well, I'll let you go first, then I'll tell you some of the ones that other people have come up with. Who does Brock Purdy remind you of?
Well, you can't. My cousins, she writes TV shows or movies in Los Angeles. One of those sort of Hollywood types. And every single movie or show we talk about, she describes it, or something that she's writing, she describes it as a combination of 2 to 3 other shows, right? So it's a little Breaking Bad with like an Eastbound and Down, like she'll combine them. Like that's what I'm working on right now. So for Brock Purdy, I think that he's Drew Brees, and I think that he is Doug Flutie, or a young Russ Wilson without the big arm, his ability to run around. Um, Gosh, I'm trying to. His accuracy is so good for a young player. That's what I think. Drew Brees was accurate, but Drew Brees didn't have nearly as quick a release as Brock, and didn't run around. Drew's a great athlete, but definitely did not like run around nearly as much as Brock, and didn't sort of create as much. He was totally dialed, and talk about a guy who visually like knew exactly where he was going with the football when it hit his hands. It was Drew dialed in with the defense, and but was very into structure. Flutie is a guy that he used to run around all the time, like start up in Canada. Of course, he start with the Bears, right? And then he goes up to Canada and runs around all the time, comes back, and like, man, old guy's been playing for 12 years already. Now he's like a rookie in the NFL, and he's running around in Buffalo and playing great football. And that's how he sort of was in San Diego till he was done. And it was like incredibly effective a lot of times, but then he turned the ball over. So like he wasn't, he didn't have a super quick release either, but from sort of a like little guy running around out there, that's sort of a comparison. I don't know. He's I haven't seen a lot of players like him before, especially at a young age. So it's going to be interesting to where his career goes. Again, like on that Iowa podcast, is Brock Purdy going to be some guy making $50 million a year, like the kid that was throwing passes at Jack Trice Stadium? Or like, is that really going to happen? We had Tyrese Halliburton, who's like a max player in the NBA, which is pretty unbelievable. You sort of feel like you just don't get those people in Ames, Iowa, and like we're going to have an NFL quarterback or not, or like it flames out all of a sudden here and he hurts his elbow again and he struggles to really throw. We don't know what's going to happen, but through 15 games or something or whatever as a starter, 12 games, whatever it is, it's incredibly impressive to what he's accomplished already so far. And so we'll see where this train goes.
Yeah, and we have seen players whose careers start off really hot because they have great teams, and then they get paid, and then et cetera, after that, and it's much harder for them because they have to carry more of a load. And this is going to be the future for Josh Allen, for Justin Herbert. Even the most wildly gifted players are still going to
Joe
have this challenge.
Burrow. Joe
Yeah,
Burrow
you're
is going to
right.
have it too.
Exactly, exactly. But I think that there's some Mark Brunell in his game for the '90s people. Not a big time prospect or anything like that, but he does have that playmaking. He's got some shiftiness, some quickness to his game, and also he had 2 amazing wide receivers and so forth. But very accurate is how I think
Mm-hmm,
of
mm-hmm.
Mark Brunell, but not like the biggest guy. And then even though Tony Romo is big-ish, like he's maybe 6'2", 6'3", but that little bit of baller kinda didn't. I mean,
Oh,
okay,
big
so
time. I I kept trying to think back who I was talking to back in those days, but discuss I was someone had a teammate somewhere who had played with Romo in Dallas for a couple years, and he was like, I've never seen someone get out of a phone booth with four defensive linemen better than he did. Like he would be just stuck in there. And there might be something when you idolize Brett Favre growing up in Wisconsin, and like you see how Brett sort of ran around and did those things of course, with the rocket arm. But and that's what Romo watched. You know, Kobe watched Jordan and sort of made his game similar to Jordan's, and sometimes they look the exact same. Like that's a real thing in sports in idolization, and Romo is one of those guys who really could get out. He's similar, but I I think Brock. I think Brock's more accurate. I think he's got a Rome had a quick release, um, but definitely a much better coached team. I don't think Romo actually he was back there a lot in shotgun and forced to run around a lot. I think their offense, if you looked at it, if you went back and watched the Dallas Cowboys now when Romo was playing, you'd feel bad for him. You'd feel bad for him because it was like shotgun first down. We're shotgunning all the time, and there just wasn't this like detail in the running game. There wasn't great play action. There wasn't. It was very simple concepts, in my opinion, and it caused him to have to like be a hero a lot. So it was fun to watch, but winning wise, it was like a lot of, I feel like 9-7, 10-6 sort of football because the details just weren't there and it was hard for him. But he's probably, yeah, throw like a Drew Brees, Tony Romo, and Doug Flutie in there, and you got Brock Purdy. It's not that might be a $50 million quarterback though. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, but I think it is a good enough quarterback to take them deep into the playoffs, and they should be a Super Bowl favorite, which will make for a very difficult matchup for the Vikings this week, particularly because he's so good against the blitz, which is Brian Flores' big thing. But before we wrap up, because I got to run out to TCO Performance Center, I wanted to ask you about the Vikings' future at quarterback. Kirk Cousins does not have an extension. I don't know how many hours you and I spent in our lives talking about the Vikings quarterback situation and breaking down all the different ways you could try to pump up Kirk Cousins. And I think what we've reached is likely the end of the road. And this, group wants to go in a different direction in the draft. You know Kevin O'Connell. And I'm curious what you think that he should be looking for if they indeed go this route in the next quarterback class, because there's a lot of quarterbacks to be liked in this next class. If you watch any college football this year, you've seen a bunch of them. Like, what do you think would fit with Kevin O'Connell?
I mean, what would fit? I think Kevin does a great job with right now. Kirk is a structured offense type of quarterback, and so I don't know yet as like a head coach what Kevin had what he would do if he had a Lamar Jackson or something like that. Right? I've only seen what he did there, and of course when he was back previously with the Rams and how McVay's offenses was, because I see the similarities there. I also see a lot of Kevin O'Connell in the Detroit offense with what Jared Goff's doing now. So I feel like structurally they do similar things, but I would assume he would want to go out there and to get more multi-dimensional guy. I think that is it, we've been saying it since I don't know when Michael Vick, maybe my year came out 2001, like, oh, we got to have the multi-dimensional run, pass, run, quarterback, but they're so hard to find. But I think more and more and more athletes, true athletes, not like myself, but real athletes who can do like 360 dunks in high school are playing the quarterback position. And there are more and more players with the coaching at a younger age, the quarterbacks coaching at a younger age, the throwing motion coaching, um, the training's better. I think there's a lot more kids with great physical skills, with great mental capacity to do all of it. And I think, I don't know, I think you go after two of them. I think every year we're going to go until we find the Brock Purdy, and you don't know until you actually have them in there a lot of times. But I think you swing, the more swings you get, the more chance of you are of connecting. And, I think he would probably like to have somebody a little bit more mobile than what Kirk's doing. But I know it's interesting. It's really hard. It's hard to develop. It's hard to bring them in, and hard to have them learn the game as quickly as possible, to get out there and start right away. The NFL, as we know, is a extremely hard business to be out in the middle of the stream and try to train your horse at the same time. And when you have a young quarterback, it's that you you'd like to have that guy, of course, already on the roster as like some young guy. I guess like what the Packers did for a couple times now, with whether it's Rodgers or Jordan Love, is have someone sit for 2 years behind a good quarterback and really see how the pros do it. And Kirk would have been a great guy to sort of be behind for 2 years or a year and a half, to be like, okay, now it's your turn, young, more talented, physically gifted quarterback. You've learned for a year and a half from this veteran guy. But I don't know if the Vikings are going to have that capability to do that. And so it is actually exciting in some ways for Vikings fans to be like, what does the future really look like? This is pretty obviously going to be a sort of a clean slate, and the GM, the head coach, aren't going to be criticized or anything for like moving on, right? So I think they've played the situation fairly well. They were extremely competitive. Of course, last year being 13-4 and having a really good season, they proved that like, hey, we've got the right coach, we've got the right system. But now they may have to have a losing season or two, as they or three or whatever, as they go out there and try to find the one who's going to bring home the Lombardi Trophy. And that's not, because even you have Josh Allen doesn't mean you get a Lombardi Trophy either. Only if you have Pat Mahomes does it make sure, does it 100% guaranteed. So it's really hard to find the future, whether it's the first round or you find a guy in the seventh round.
If I were Kevin O'Connell, and this is from watching now a year and a half of tape of his offense, there's two things that I would want. I would want a guy who could make me right when I'm wrong, because he sends a lot of receivers deep down the field, which creates a lot of space, but sometimes they cover it up, and it's just there isn't much of an answer there for Kirk, but the answer might be escape, roll out, gain 15 yards running. Like, oh, my play didn't work, or there wasn't any great opportunity there, or there was pressure, and this guy made me right with a play. There was a play on third and long the other day where Kirk gets no pressure whatsoever, and it's man coverage, but everyone's kind of covered up, and one side of the field is just completely open, that I think a quarterback who has any running mentality turns, rolls out, and runs for 15 yards. But that's just never going to be who Kirk Cousins is. The other thing is, too, that he runs a lot of these deep route combinations that are kind of clearing out for underneath stuff for the tight end and things like that. But he's got Jefferson. Jefferson is as good of a downfield receiver as I've ever seen. Like, you want Matt Stafford to throw that ball in there. I mean, even if the guy's not perfect with accuracy, I feel like Jefferson is another guy who makes you right when the throw is wrong. And what we don't see from Cousins, who has a good arm when he can set off good platform, but does not have a Matt Stafford rocket,
No,
fire it in there into the tight window. And I think that O'Connell would want that for his offense.
I can very much see that. Maybe you have the inside information, but I can see both the Rams, excuse me, the Rams and Minnesota sort of moving on from their veteran quarterback, going younger, and especially with O'Connell having coached Stafford, excuse me, or been with him before. That would be a perfect fit. Again, they have similar offenses already, so he'd be a perfect fit. But also, again, you got to find the next generation. You do. I mean, both those guys are almost done. You do have to find the next generation. But I would think that, at least for excitement, I would think that for Vikings fans, that would be an upgrade. Even if statistically it's maybe they're an even quarterback situation with where Stafford is right now, and his propensity to throw a lot of interceptions sometimes. But I think that would be a good move. But again, you have to go out and find that quarterback, and you may have to draft two. Again, I'm a big believer in, like, if you're swinging, you might as well swing a whole bunch, and hope that one of them connects. And Brock Purdy was the last pick of the draft, and they found magic over there in San Francisco.
Yeah, and you do have to draft high to get a Matt Stafford prototype, and we'll see where they end up drafting as we go down the road. But Sage Rosenfels, great to get together with you again. I always enjoy our conversations, and no matter when we're talking or what we're talking about, always learn something about football from you. So keep your phone on and be ready for Jay Fiedler's stats to show up in your phone randomly from me at some point. We had Jay Fiedler on the show once. Great guy.
Wonderful guy. Jay, it's funny when I was playing. Jay was a veteran. He was the veteran star in Miami. I already had a son. He didn't have kids until like 2 years ago, so he's like 50 with with two little ones, and we're like in opposite spectrums of our life right now. So you never miss a good Jay Fiedler reference.
Exactly. So I'm always there for you with that. But thanks for your time, and we'll get together again, man, for sure.
Thank you. All right, good seeing you.